All right, everybody. Joining us now is Congressman representing the great state of Mississippi, Michael Guest. Congressman, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me back. It's good to see you again.
Great to see you, sir. And you know, there's this litmus test that I have that anytime the media, the mainstream media tells me there's nothing to see here, ignore it, don't even tune in, I know that there probably is something there. And that is exactly the situation tonight with this address to President Trump. Reports are that it is going to be on election integrity and some pretty serious election breaches, specifically in 2020. That's the rumor around town. You've got a lot of mainstream networks out there who are saying that they're not going to air it, or maybe they'll start airing it and then they'll probably cut into it when they figure out what it's actually about. What are they so worried? I mean, doesn't everyone want election integrity?
You know, we should. And look, that's something that, I mean, if you look at the basis of the founding of this nation, it was founded upon Americans being able to choose their leaders. And the only way to do that is through free and fair elections. And election integrity matters. We need to make sure that when we go to the polls, that only those individuals who are eligible to vote are allowed to cast vote, and that all votes are counted. And so that is what we've seen with the SAVE Act, the Save America Act. We know that this is an important priority for the president. The president really wants to see this across the finish line so that it can be implemented in the midterm elections. And so I think that's going to be what the president is going to speak about tonight, that he is going to challenge Congress to get this done, to finally get the Senate to pass what we've passed in the House, election integrity bills, so that when we go to the polls in a few weeks, as we know, voting will start in some early voting states very quickly. But when we go to the polls and when those votes are counted in November, that the right people are elected, because the right people are those with the most votes. And the only way to assure that is with election integrity and with the legislation such as the SAVE Act or the Save America Act.
Absolutely. Well, and sir, it's one thing to have election cheating happening in our own country, but we saw this with the UK a few years ago. Their elections were hacked by China, and now they do not have machines anymore. They said, we will not go back to machines ever once we have seen what China was able to access. So, you know, who knows if the case is China this time around? It doesn't really matter. The fact that you have a foreign power accessing or potentially accessing our election and voter information, isn't that something that everyone should be concerned about? Because Democrats may not care about it right now, but the tables could be turned and it could be elections weaponized against them one day.
You're right. Well, whether it be China, Russia, Iran, any of our foreign adversaries, I think there are inherent dangers with electronic voting, that where there is no paper trail, when you can go back and audit and you can verify those results. We've learned a lot of lessons in election integrity, how to make sure that, again, that we have checks and balances so that we can cast electronic ballots, but there is a paper receipt that can later be marked up if there are challenges to those elections. And look, election integrity should be the primary focus of Republicans between now and November. Look, I was a former prosecutor. As a former prosecutor in Mississippi, I was one of the few prosecutors that actually prosecuted voter fraud. We had people in our jurisdiction in which I served as a prosecutor who were not legally able to cast votes, but they did, and their votes were then counted in that election cycle. Now, at least in that situation, those votes were not enough to skew the outcome of the election, but that's not always the case. So we look at someone like Representative Mariette Miller Meeks, who, when she won her first election from Iowa, she won by a mere 6 votes. And so for people to say that there is no voter fraud, or that the voter fraud is not such that it could skew elections, that information is wrong. It's inaccurate. And we, as Congress, must make sure that the American people feel safe to go to the polls and count and cast their vote, and that they can rely upon the results once those votes are counted, and we don't have foreign adversaries, or we don't have members of political parties trying to skew election results.
All right. So before we move on to something else, Save America Act, I know a lot of people think that it's basically dead in the water, but it can be attached to a budget bill. Does it seem like that has a viable path of success?
That is something that we're looking at doing through the budget reconciliation process, creating grants for states that implement voter ID. And look, voter ID is not new. Currently, 36 states actually have voter ID. Voter ID began in the 1950s in South Carolina. Our United States Supreme Court has said repeatedly that voter ID is legal, that it is not a form of voter intimidation. My state of Mississippi passed voter ID by constitutional amendment in 2011 under the Obama administration, and we work with the Obama Justice Department, a very Democrat Justice Department, a Republican state working with a Democrat Department of Justice to implement voter ID in my home state of Mississippi, and it has worked exceedingly well. Look, one of the ways that we can prevent voter fraud is making people show ID. There are other elements such as scaling down mail-in ballots. We know states like California will mail ballots without individuals requesting it. That creates a large amount or a large opportunity for voter fraud. And we also have the citizenship component that we see in the Save America Act that required individuals when they register for the first time, not every time they go vote, but the first time registration, that they must show proof of citizenship. I think those are common sense measures. I think they are supported by the public. I know voter ID, we've seen polls both by Gallup and Pew that show that over 80% of Americans support showing an ID at a time in which individuals cast their ballots. And so this is something that we must continue to push across the finish line, and I'm glad to see that the president is continuing to lean in and continuing to lead this charge.
Well, and, the Democrat messaging about how this is going to affect married women because of the whole name change thing. I'm a married woman. I went through the name change thing. Sure, it's kind of rickety trying to decide if you want to do driver's license first, social security, passport, whatever. But the easiest part of it was getting my name changed on my voter registration. So that doesn't pass the sniff test with me. I want to ask you about Iran continuing to trade barbs back and forth. But yesterday there was what seemed like an olive branch from Iran releasing an American who had been detained there, releasing to the Trump administration. Does that augur to you that talks are progressing?
Look, the proof's in the pudding, and we're going to see what Iran does with shipping there in the Middle East. If they allow free passage through the Gulf, if they allow ships to flow without trying to extract some sort of toll, I think that is a good faith effort that the American public can look at, and that we can then get back to the negotiating table. But as long as they are going to try to hold shipping hostage in the Persian Gulf, I think the president is doing the right thing, which he must continue to increase the tempo, continue to increase the pressure on the Iranian government, on the Iranian military officials, and let them know that this behavior is not acceptable. He has to use force to bring them back to the negotiating table. And look, the president has said, look, his two red lines are that Iran can never obtain a nuclear weapon and that we must have the free flow of goods in and out of the Persian Gulf, and that is going to require Iran to stand down on both those issues. And so I support the president. I do not want to see a nuclear weaponized Iran, and I think it is important that we continue to see the free flow of goods, particularly oil and energy products coming out of the Middle East, going across the globe.
Sir, in your capacity as chairman of the Subcommittee on Border Security and Enforcement, I want to ask you about what's transpired over the last few days. We had a couple fatal shootings involving ICE. You then had Maine Senator, where one of the shootings was, Maine Senator Susan Collins come out and urge DHS and Secretary Mark Wayne Mullen to stop these routine traffic stops. It seems like there was a bit of a moratorium on it, but then yesterday President Trump said, go back. So they did. In your capacity as chairman, is it true that these routine routine traffic stops have borne fruit? Because it seems to me this is similar to broken window policing that they did in the 1990s in New York City. When you have that type of traffic stop, you are able to create kind of a dragnet situation where you can bring in more of these people who may be breaking the law. Was it the right move by the president?
Yeah, look, I never want to handicap law enforcement. Law enforcement has the ability to enforce laws, including routine traffic stops. We know that often routine traffic stops lead to bigger arrests. They lead to investigations in which narcotics are uncovered, weapons trafficking, human trafficking. So for us to say we want to limit and we want to stop any Homeland Security agency from having that authority to do so, I do not agree with that. I think it is wrong. I think the president made the right decision. We cannot allow the left in their outrage over an incident to impact the way in which policing is conducted across the United States, particularly asking law enforcement to give up powers which the court has recognized are legal authorities given to them. Now, I do know that Chairman Garbarino, Andrew Garbarino, who chairs the Committee on Homeland Security in the House, has already reached out to Homeland Security. We intend to get a briefing, hopefully as early as next week, involving the recent shootings involving Homeland Security officers. And I would imagine that there will be hearings and additional oversight once these investigations are completed. So, look, Congress is not turning a blind eye to these investigations. We're also seeking to roll out the body cams, which have been funded through some of the reconciliation packages, seeking to roll those out much quicker. Those were delayed because of the government shutdown. There have been conversations with people within DHS stating that those body cams need to be in the hands of as many officers as possible, as quickly as possible. But Congress is conducting oversight. We're going to continue to monitor this situation. But I do not support handcuffing our law enforcement officers and telling them that they do not or should not be conducting traffic stops.
Absolutely. Very important. I knew you were the best person to ask about this. Sir, thank you so much for being with us. It's an honor.
Yeah, thank you again.